you're somebody who's living with, alcoholism or addiction, for example, that train wreck is very visible outside of you, right? But internally, we're all a train wreck, right? Because there's a lot of pain, and it goes back, for me, the way I can best describe it, my own personal experience with it. And I've heard it described in a lot of different ways. But for me, it was literally like something that was just suffocating my heart, right? And suffocating my heart, not allowing me to be able to engage in healthy relationships. And part of that was because I didn't know how to do that.
I've got a great guest, Beth Jones. And Beth is the founder of Empowered Survivors, creator of the HEAL framework. And that stands for Hope, Evolve, and Love. And she's also a 2-time best-selling author, speaker, and a host of her own podcast called Let's Heal with Beth Jones podcast. You can find her and more information at www.empoweredsurvivors.com. Beth, welcome.
Thank you, Chuck. I'm very excited to be here today.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have this conversation with you too,
Me
because,
too.
we all survive something, right?
We
So,
do.
so my first thought and question really is that you often say that we are all survivors in one way or another, which is so true. But how can someone really recognize the difference between simply surviving and truly living? Are there different signs that we can look for?
Yes. It has to do with how much pain and suffering you're living with, right? As survivors, and when I say that, and that we've all survived something, I think people tend to go to the big T trauma, what we know as big T traumas, the major adverse events that we may or may not experience in our life. And I think some people might go through their entire life and never have what they might identify as a trauma or an abuse, a major event happening to them. And if that's true, and if I meet that person, I hope I do meet that person because I think they have a blessed life. I would really like to know them someday and just who they are and what they were created to be on this earth to do. Because I think trauma and abuse and then the opportunity to heal is part of the human experience, right? We just go through it. If you've not survived those big T type events, you most surely have experienced what they call the little T type events. And I think about these in the context of the daily interactions that we have with people who sometimes that person might just be having an off day, woke up on the wrong side of the bed in a bad mood, but the interaction with you is painful and you internalize it and take it on. Or it may be an ongoing relationship with someone who's just a difficult spouse, a controlling parent, a boss that is really hard to work for. And those over time compound what we're carrying inside of us in order to be able to exist in those environments and with those people. And that impacts us as individuals. And if we don't do something about what we're carrying inside of us, particularly if it's causing harm to us personally, or if we're impacting others through our behavior and the way that we interact with them because of what we're carrying, that's not a good place to be. And if you're living in that space, then you're just surviving. And it's logical. Something has happened to you, something painful. You've created a response to that, some sort of a protective mechanism around yourself. And that's okay in the moment. We need that. But carrying it with you throughout the rest of your life and letting it encumber, or as I think about it, really restrain the heart, put binds and chains around the heart that prevent us from being able to engage in truly loving relationships with all kinds of people. And I mean that in our personal life, and I also mean that in our professional life, the ability to show up in love and with love for our fellow human beings, right? And that's the thriving part. Once we get to that place where we actually can engage in those types of really healthy, wonderful, very self-satisfying relationships, that's when we're thriving. And that's when we're not living in survival mode so much anymore, and we're living on the other side of that where we understand what's happened to us, why, and we've done something about it. That's the healing journey.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you said, the big T, the little T, because one traumatic incident might not be so traumatic to somebody else. So we can't judge people nor each other by saying, well, that's no big deal. Because you don't know that person's story. So a lot of us carry these stories that might have come from the past, from our childhood and things like that. And
Hmm.
so I'm wondering, what does it really take to rewrite those stories and reclaim the power that we need to take back?
It's very simple, but it's complicated. So the simple answer is you need to heal. And
Okay.
that's what I now spend every waking hour of my life doing, is talking to people about what that means. And, I can say that to you very simply: heal. My message is powerful. You too can heal, because I believe everyone can do it, but you do have to be intentional and focus and take the action and the time that you need to go through that process. So simple to tell you what to do, much harder to actually do it.
So many things in
Yeah.
life are like that, right? That's a
Yes.
simple answer, but it's so difficult to do for one
Yeah.
reason or another. That's
Yeah.
like, we talk about transformation and rewiring, and it
Hmm.
sounds so easy and obvious, but it's so difficult, I think, to rewire our consciousness. So,
Yes, it
um,
is.
it's
Yeah, and I mean, I've been on my own healing journey now for a little over 6 years. And, I spent about 2 years in the really, really very, very deep, really hard part of it. And even today, with everything I learned through that experience and the practices and the healing tools that I use for myself to help keep myself in a more optimal, high energetic, love based energy state, a more healed state, I still have days where something will happen and I may find myself reverting right back to an old way of being that was a trauma response in the past. And I don't think they ever leave us. I think they're hardwired into us as protective mechanisms, as are the experiences that we have that are adverse and painful. What we're hoping to do is to integrate them into our fabric and create an awareness so that when we see the reaction, the trauma response coming, coming to the surface, we know what to do to help ourselves through whatever it is we're experiencing and sort of mitigate the impact, and using our tools again to heal. And because I tell people, that there is no destination when you're healing, right? I mean, there's no, and this is one of the things that I think is a challenge for people who are struggling and trying to get help from whatever it is they're trying to get help with, is that we think, oh, I'm going to read this book, or I'm going to go to this therapy for, 10 weeks, or I'm going to take on breath work, or whatever it may be, right? And all of those are necessary if they work for you, and we need them. But alone in isolation and for a limited period of time, they will not help you to heal. They will help you in a short period of time, and you might feel better for the period of time that you're using them. But when you stop, if you really haven't healed what's beneath your survival mechanisms, or your survival patterns and your coping mechanisms, then you're going to find yourself right back in that place. And my experience is that it's a combination of those, and having the awareness to know, this is happening to me, this is what I need to go and do. And it may be as simple as, I need to do my breath work right now, or I need to get outside and go for a run, or I need to call my therapist, whatever it may be. But you know what to do, and you have those tools on board for the rest of your life. Because, as I said earlier, and we mentioned, right, that the pain that we experience is part of our human experience. And you're going to continue to have relationships with people, unless you're going to go live in a cave or become a hermit, live under a rock. You're going to have relationships with people. And so your exposure to difficult situations that are going to cause you pain is always going to be there. And so
yeah.
you always need to be in a place where you're ready to help yourself when that happens. And by the way, I would also say that when we heal, we're stopping the cycle of putting that need to react or have a trauma response onto someone else, right? Your child, your spouse, your coworker. We're not taking what's inside of us, the pain inside of us, and giving it to someone else because we're reacting, right? Or we're still living with a survival pattern, or we have some coping mechanism that is not healthy and it's impacting a lot of people, right? So it is about self, but it's also about what I've been calling recently in some of my work, the wound with the radius, right? And so not allowing that radius to, continue to touch people in a negative way that puts them into this cycle where they now need to do the work.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's so true because um, if you, I guess, if you wear your emotions on your sleeve, others are going to see it and they're going to feel it too. So it can affect them. The other thing
Mm-hmm.
too that um, these things aren't kind of like what you said. They're always going to be there. It's not like you go through this and you figure, oh, I've rewired myself. I'm cured. I'm fixed. It's not like that. So I
It's
think
not
that's
like
the other
that.
thing that many people
Yeah.
they have this thought or idea where they take a course or somebody helps them get through something that they're completely done and they're fixed and healed. It's kind of more like it's still a daily process, I think, right?
Mm.
To
It is. It is a daily process, and I think one of the challenges that we have is, you mentioned if you're the type of person who wears their emotions on their sleeve, or you don't have a very good poker face, right? That's that's definitely a telltale sign. But I'm one of those people who really lived for many years because of the trauma and abuse I've experienced and really the way that I protected myself. I went for 45 years in this increasing state of becoming emotionless. And that's because every emotion that I had was not okay to have, wasn't safe for me to have my emotions. And so I stuck them into this massive wall that I built around myself. And those 2 years that I mentioned previously, when I was really intentional and focused on what I was doing, was all about breaking down that wall, figuring out what was in it and breaking it down. Because I was that person who was emotionless, I still had survival patterns and coping mechanisms that were not good, and they were impacting me in a negative way, and they were impacting people around me in a negative way. And I carried them into every aspect of my life. Right? I spend a lot of time now talking about leadership performance and the intersection of leadership performance and healing, because as leaders, I think the workplace in many cases can exacerbate our survival patterns. And most of the time, if you're like me, you don't even know that's what's happening. Right? But things that you're doing, and they may not seem, things that we're doing around control or perfectionism or scarcity hoarding. Those all show up in the workplace, but we might not have the ability to identify that it's a survival pattern, much less where it came from. Right?
hmm
And so those types of things are still happening, whether the emotion is there or not, right? And that, and all of those things do impact. They have again the wound with the radius, right? There's an impact, a cost to all of that in our personal lives and our professional lives.
Now, this might be me reaching for something, but I mean, you were for many years a successful career-oriented person. But I
Mhm.
believe in your story, part of your story, you were highly successful, but you were struggling inside why you were becoming so successful. So my question would be is, why do you think that so many high achievers um, become experts and then they're still struggling inside? Is it that success is covering it or masking something, or like you said, it's kind of blocking off your emotions to other things? Is it something along those lines, or?
Yeah, so I think a lot of what can happen in the workplace is that environment actually rewards survival patterns, right? So let's take perfectionism, for example, which, in the line of business that I was in, I worked in professional services and I was a forensic accountant, and I investigated fraud and white collar crime, right? And so there was either a regulatory proceeding with government agencies, or there was a litigation that was going on, right? And so the work that I would do with my team and in the organizations I worked for would end up in front of a trier of fact, whether that was a judge or a regulator, right? And, I'm talking regulatory bodies. I'm talking Department of Justice, SEC, Department of Commerce, those types of agencies. There's a need to make sure that whatever work product is going out with your name on it, or the firm's name where you're the leader of that project and ultimately you're responsible for the deliverable, there is a level of perfectionism that the word expert implies. And so if you come from a place where perfectionism was about seeking validation through achievement because you never could get validation unless you were achieving at a very high level from a parent, let's say, you carry that with you. Now perfectionism is being exacerbated in the very environment that rewards perfectionism. Right. And that's the challenge. And there are other survival patterns that are like that. And so figuring out there, for me, I start really to look at signals and behaviors, and that's what I did for myself. Right. So what is it that you're doing with perfectionism? Right. And so if you're coming into the work environment and it's not having an adverse impact, then okay, maybe it doesn't go back to something that you experienced as a child or grew up with. Maybe it's just something that's happening in the moment, right? And that's fine. But and you would know that because the signals and the behaviors around the perfectionism are going to be okay, right? You're not going to be doing things that are hurting people, right? But if you are doing things that are adversely impacting your team or adversely impacting your organization, well, you might have a survival pattern that's running that you need to do some work on and look at healing, right? And so I think just the nature of, an expert, obviously, somebody who says I'm an expert is a high performer, sees themselves as a high performer. But, I've had people on my show, who were, ultra marathoners, right? And that was their high performance. And for them, perfectionism was never being able to feel like they had accomplished whatever it was that they were trying to accomplish in ultra marathoning. Right. And then I've, had people on my show who even in that very perfectionist behavior, that high performing behavior, they know where it came from now. But along with that came a terrible burden, for example, of alcoholism. Right. And so I had a guy on my show who is that super high performer, high achiever, but he was also an alcoholic for a period of time. And so he would literally run his routes trying to become a marathoner, run his routes past liquor stores. So that just kind of gives you a sense of, the outside, here's the high performer achieving, but what's underneath that is detrimental to him, right? And he was able to find out what was happening to him, and he's, blessed to have had the opportunity to go on his own healing journey, and he's not living with the difficult parts of being a high performer. He has it more in check, right? Or recognizes now when he's doing things to fuel the high performer that are actually survival-based responses or trauma responses.
Yeah. Now, this may sound weird when I put it this way, but all those things that you're mentioning and people who are like that, many people on the outside look and say, wow, they've got power, they've achieved. But my question really would be, what does reclaiming, real power really feel like? I mean, to me personally, that would be just this comfort. I don't know how to explain it, but, um,
Yeah. So when you first started saying that, the reason I'm laughing is because I was like, oh, because I was a wreck on the inside, right? I mean, and that's how we are. I mean, we're a train wreck on the inside. And, in some cases, there's a train wreck following us, right? If we're, doing things that are hurting other people along the way, which I think we all do in varying forms. But, again, if you're somebody who's living with, alcoholism or addiction, for example, that train wreck is very visible outside of you, right? But internally, we're all a train wreck. Right? Because there's a lot of pain, and it goes back, for me, the way I can best describe it, my own personal experience with it. And I've heard it described in a lot of different ways, but for me, it was literally like something that was just suffocating my heart, right? And suffocating my heart, not allowing me to be able to engage in healthy relationships. And part of that was because I didn't know how to do that, because I had never experienced that from a very early age. I lived in a very protective cocoon that I was building around myself without having any idea that is what I was doing. And so I the way it feels to let that go is, it's pure joy, right? To be able to go through, and I'll get pretty specific here, but, to be able to go through, for me, the experience of healing the relationship with my grandfather, who was the first person who abused me as a child, to heal that relationship with someone who, when I went through that process, had already passed on. In fact, he had been dead for 25 years before I started my healing journey. But to be able to progress through what I've been through, and I describe my personal experience as chapters in my relationship with him, and they're all centered around his eyes, because I knew him when he was alive with these predatory eyes that just terrified me, right? And they came up at different times through my life. And the very last chapter, which I think is the last chapter of healing the relationship, I was in a therapy session with my trauma therapist, and I had the opportunity to see, this was in a Reiki session. When I was sort of in my subconscious state in the Reiki session, I had the opportunity to see his eyes when he was a 5-year-old boy, before he had experienced the trauma and human conditioning that made him the person who he was. So he had been this person who, I mentioned the predatory eyes. For me, he was scary, almost a monster. And I was able to see him that's actually not who he was. He wasn't born that way. He was born with love and innocence, but his experiences caused him to be a survivor. And the way he dealt with that was very painful for me and for other people in my family. Right. And so when I got to that point where I recognized him as a survivor, and that actually, seeing him as a survivor actually happened before I had the opportunity to see him as the 5-year-old, the love and the innocence. But when I recognized him as a survivor, and I realized that what he had done, the way he had lived his life, was really about survival and not about being an awful, terrible human at his core, I was able to see him that way because I knew myself as a survivor. And I knew that a lot of things that I had been doing in my life were not because I'm a terrible, awful human being. It's because I was a survivor. And I could see that in him. And it's what I call mirroring, seeing myself in you and me, both as survivors. And when I get to that place, that's when that bind on my heart goes away. I can let that go. And the person who hurt me is no longer in control of me and my behavior. They no longer impact me the way that they have in the past in an adverse or painful way. And that feeling to let go, literally, it's like a release, right? And I can just feel my heart expanding when that happens, because I've shed the control and the pain that individual has had for such a long time in my life.
This is like fear versus love, and I don't know.
Yes.
This sounds like it's going along the lines of your heal framework. Is it? Or
Yes, actually, it is. It is, and this is it's part of what I talk about this. I wrote about it in the book. And it's interesting, because I wrote the book, and it's structured in 3 major sections around fostering hope, and all of these are action based areas of work, right? These are not, not concept, not the fluffy feel good kind of stuff, right? I mean, it's actually, it's a how to, like, this is how you do it. And I would suspect that from what I've said about my former career and being super successful in the environments that I work with, you probably would know that I'm not that kind of, I love woo-woo people. I'm not. I love them, and I have them all around helping me. Absolutely. But I'm much more direct, practical, pragmatic. I need models, methodologies that actually work. Show me how to do it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I wrote, not really knowing that's what I was doing. And so I talk about what does it mean to actually foster hope, and what is hope? What does it do for us in the healing journey? And the main thing that hope does for us is when you're fostering hope, because without hope, you'll quit because it's painful. The work sucks. It's hard. And if you don't have hope, you can't see hope fueled by your own incremental steps that you're making every day. This is where the woo comes in, because it may be, yeah, I got out of bed today. Yes, I brushed my teeth. Yes, I went for a walk today. Yes, I played with my dog. It may be those things that are fostering hope, or it may be, eureka, my grandfather no longer has the control over me. right? No longer holding me in the place that I was of bondage, right? So those are the things that foster the hope and keep us going because we see our progress. And hopefully you hear people like me talking. Maybe you have a story, people on my show who give you the hope and fuel that for you. Evolving is all about the tools that we used, right? So this is, there's no book, there's no breath work, there's no particular therapy, there's no meditation that's going to help you in isolation and on its own. It's figuring out what works for you and helps you to be in the most optimum state you can keep yourself in, right? The highest energetic level that you've evolved to at that moment, right? That's what we're using our tools to do. And that's what healing is about, moving us out of that fear-based state, those fear-based emotions into love-based emotions, right? And so that's evolving, right? So I'm going to use those tools to become the best version of me that I can be. And what does that mean? That means breaking down, for me, the wall, breaking down whatever it is that's holding you back, that's constraining you, healing the survival patterns, healing what's underneath that, right? And that process then, in my experience, leads to a space so we get to let go, right? Start letting go of those painful relationships, but we also get to start seeing what an amazing human being we are, because evolving is not just about dealing with the reactive coping mechanisms and the survival patterns. It's also about identifying who we actually are. What's my favorite color? What are my emotional needs? What are my strengths? And this is a challenge because for me, some of my greatest strengths can become my Achilles heels and just drag me right back down in a codependent way, right? And so we have to learn about that when we're evolving so that we can deal with all of that. But when we're looking at our qualities, our values, purpose, why are we here? We discover we're pretty amazing people. And when we do, that is now self-love, right? And as you discover the person who you were always meant to be before anybody did anything to hurt you and you figured out how to survive, you now are becoming the person who you were born to be. And I think most people will love that person. I do. And as I meet people who've been on this journey, they love that person. And that is self-love. That is real self-love. And, then coupled with the love then is, there's other forms of love, spiritual love, looking at healthy relationships and really fostering healthy relationships. And then, of course, you have to do the work to deal with the unhealthy relationships, but in a loving way, right? And you can't do that work with the unhealthy, I don't think, until you've come to a place where you're in a better state of being yourself, right? At least have the self-love. And for many, many of us, the spiritual love and however we know God or the universe, right? However we get that spiritual fulfillment. When you have those two things, then you can start to move on. I think that's the time when you start to deal with the unhealthy relationships.
Uh,
That's the
immediately.
heal framework. That's actually what I teach, right? And that is now become something it is a how-to. This is how you actually do it. And, now that's, my work now is to share that with as many people as I can share it with and everybody who's listening here and, really give people the hope that yeah, you too can heal and then show them how to do it.
Yeah. It's as soon as you started talking about this and we're talking about your heal framework and hope, evolve, and love, I immediately went to the hope and love. Without hope, there's fear. Without love, there's fear. And fear causes you to make these decisions that could possibly guide you in the wrong direction. And I think oftentimes when we don't know that we're still afraid of something or that there's some sort of fear, but we also wonder why are these things happening to me? And I think that goes back to you've got to have hope and you've got to be able to evolve and you have to be able to love yourself. And then once you have those, your direction should be, do I dare say it, an easier path? Should be.
I mean, I think that's true. It is an easier path, and I said this before, and there's no end to the healing journey. I do think there is a destination. That destination is love, but we're constantly having people come into our lives that cause us pain, right? Or experiences that cause us pain, and so that's why we're always ongoing. But I do think that with practice and over time, and this is something that I have clear examples of in my own life, I have become faster and more resilient. So when something happens to me now that is painful, um, I don't, I don't live in it. The first time, I mean, I lived in pain for 45 years. Then I did a lot of my healing work, and then I had somebody in my life who I laugh now and say that God was teaching me my remedial lesson about a couple of things I didn't get the first pass through, and that remedial lesson came with the heat turned way up. Right? So I learned it. Maybe it's because it was so hot, but I learned it much quicker, and I knew what I was meant to be learning. Right, and so I got through the pain. I had to go through a cycle of grief again, processing grief, which was surprising to me, but I did have to go through a full grief cycle again, but I did it in a much shorter period of time, right? So it was only about 2 years, right? And so I said, this was, with men in my life. And so, I'd say it took me, 30 years to learn what I learned in the relationship with my first husband. And then I was dating someone for 2 years. So, 30 years, 2 years, it's getting shorter, right? And then, more recently, I've had an experience where I've had to uh, go through a full healing process. And I don't think it's the full gamut of grief emotions, although I may still be working on what's happened. And it's a different familial relationship that something has happened in that's deeply painful to me. And I'm okay. I've had, a couple days here and there that have been very low days and, a lot of sadness or a lot of anger. But when I'm telling you I went from 30 years to 2 years to now, I can recognize what's happening, even as it comes in cycles. It's a much shorter period of time and it's not as deep because I know what's happening. I understand what's in play. And I also understand, because of the work that I've done, that the person and the people, my first husband, the person that I dated for a period of time after him, and now this family member, they're all survivors. And so I understand that what they're doing is just a reaction to their own human conditioning. The difference between them and me is that I don't think they've had the opportunity to go through a healing process like what I've gone through. They don't have the same level of understanding or the tools on board to be able to help themselves, right? And I have compassion and empathy for them because I'm that person. I'm a survivor, right? And so it doesn't make what they're doing okay. And I have to deal with boundaries, in different ways that I need to take care of myself. But the ability to move through that again it's much quicker, right? Because I'm faster and resilient because I've had practice with my tools and I know what works for me.
Yeah, and we do need guidance, help, and tools. So I want to just remind everybody that today's conversation is with Beth Jones, and you can find out more information about what we're talking about and about her Heal framework by going to empoweredsurvivors.com. And I invite you to listen to her podcast as well, called Let's Heal with Beth Jones podcast. So, I mean,
Yes.
these are all,
Thank you for that.
yeah, these are all such very important things. And I don't think that there's one human being, and I'm going to say human being, that's out there that has not experienced this, or kind of like what you said at the beginning. If there is somebody that has never experienced any of this, I want to meet them, kind of
I
thing.
do.
You and me both, because I want to formulate
Yes.
whatever it is that's running through their veins.
Yes.
So Beth, if someone's listening today that feels that they are overwhelmed, disconnected, or kind of like what you're saying, they're simply going through the emotions of stuff or the emotions, is there one truth that you could provide them with hope that they remember that they could completely change the direction of their life? Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Because the truth is the very simple but powerful message that I've already given, and it's that you too can heal. And when you do that work, I've been, saying a lot recently, when you do that work, you literally lead, live, and love better. Every aspect of your life will improve when you do that work. And that is the truth. The other truth is where you started that, we're all survivors. But the positive truth is that you too can heal. Yeah. Mm.
Great information. Is there anything else that you want to leave us with?
The only thing I'll say is, if you are like, if this is landing, like if you have that inner knowing, you're feeling something, you're having a reaction, maybe your reaction is even like you're trying to turn it off, but you can't completely turn it off. I would say go with that. In the work that I used to do, that's what we call the thread that you start to pull to unravel what's happening, right? And to go back and do the investigation on how you got to this point, right? And what's there, right? And pull it, right? Don't turn away from it. Pull it, because you'll go through some difficult things, but once you do, life is joyful.
And
Yeah.
just a quick reminder for me to folks out there, don't diminish what somebody else is going through because you think that should be so easy. We all deal with things differently,
We
and we
do.
all feel things differently. So
Yes. Yeah, I agree, Chuck. I was going to say earlier when you said that, I think the measure is the internal, what it does to somebody inside of them. That's the measure. And the only person who knows that is the person who experiences it.
yeah. And if you're
Yeah.
the person that's viewing and not having that experience, have compassion. Have
Yes.
compassion towards everyone.
Yes. Yes.
Beth, this has been fantastic. I got to say thank you very much.
You're welcome. Yeah, it was a good chatting with you. So I like having this conversation. If you can't tell, I'm quite passionate about what I believe and what I've experienced and what I want everybody to hear.
I can tell.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
thanks again.
Yeah, my pleasure.